handshake denied, a door closed, a heart broken. But sometimes, rejection isn't the end, it's the spark for the most unexpected victory. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, its golden light spilling generously across the quiet suburban streets. The air carried the faint hum of cicadas, and every so often, a breeze whispered through the rows of young trees planted carefully along the sidewalks. Beyond the manicured hedges and the uniform lines of trimmed grass, a modern housing complex stretched proudly toward the horizon, its glass facades gleaming as though they had been polished just for this day. Marcus and Alana slowed their pace. As they approached the entrance, the couple walked hand in hand, their steps measured and steady, as though they were holding back the bubbling anticipation inside them. Both had dressed with care, not only for themselves, but for what this day represented. Marcus wore a crisp navy blazer over a pale shirt, his tie tucked neatly into place. Alana had chosen a cream-colored dress that danced lightly with every movement, her hair pinned into a soft bun that revealed the curve of her smile when the sunlight touched it. In Marcus's other hand was a thick folder, edges slightly worn from weeks of preparation. Inside were bank statements, pre-approval letters, references every document a family could need to prove they were ready. Alana carried her own binder as well, tucked tightly against her side. She had color-coded each page with sticky notes, a testament to her organized nature and her determination not to leave anything to chance. This wasn't a casual outing, it was the beginning of their next chapter. They had spent months searching, scrolling through listings late at night, whispering dreams back and forth across their pillows. They imagined bedrooms filled with laughter, a kitchen that smelled of Sunday dinners, and a backyard big enough for their children someday to run free. This particular complex had caught their attention more than once. The design was modern, but inviting, a blend of sleek architecture and soft landscaping. The brochure promised luxury living with a community feel, and they had pictured themselves belonging here, surrounded by neighbors and possibilities. As they reached the main pathway, Marcus paused, pulling Alana slightly closer. He looked up at the buildings, the mirrored surfaces reflecting the wide, cloudless sky. His jaw loosened as he exhaled. "It looks even better in person," he murmured, his voice low, almost reverent. Alana's eyes glimmered with the same thought. He didn't say aloud that this could finally be the place where their future rooted itself. She squeezed his hand, her lips curling into a smile that carried both nerves and hope. "I could see us here," she whispered, scanning the row of windows, each one a possibility. "I could see us coming home." The sidewalk curved gently toward the leasing office, its entrance framed by tall glass doors and polished steel handles. Through the panes, the inside glowed with artificial light. Pamphlets lined the counter, and a few balloons floated lazily in the corner as if celebrating the lives soon to begin within these walls. They were not alone, however. Other couples strolled ahead and behind them, each dressed neatly, each holding their own folders or papers. Some chatted with animated excitement, pointing to the balconies and terraces. A young family with a toddler stopped to admire the playground nearby, their laughter carrying in the open air. For Marcus and Alana, the sight only deepened their anticipation. They felt no envy, only reassurance. If so many others wanted to live here, then perhaps they had chosen wisely. Alana adjusted the strap of her handbag and stole a glance at her husband. She noticed the way he carried himself, his back straight, his expression calm yet brimming with intent. He had always been the one to ground her, the steady hand when her own nerves trembled. Yet now she saw something else in him too, a flicker of boyish excitement hidden beneath the surface, as though he too was daring to dream. "Do you think we'll like the inside as much as the outside?" she asked, half teasing, half sincere. Marcus smiled, the corners of his mouth tugging upward. "I think we'll like it even more." They reached the steps leading to the office. Marcus held the door for Alana, and together they stepped into the cool air-conditioned lobby. A faint scent of lemon polish lingered, mixing with the aroma of fresh flowers arranged on the counter. The floor gleamed, and the walls were adorned with framed photographs of happy residents standing proudly in front of their new homes. Marcus and Alana exchanged a glance, their hearts thudding in unison. Everything in this place seemed to whisper possibility, as if urging them forward, as if promising that today could be the day when all their careful planning bore fruit. For a brief moment, they stood silently at the threshold, absorbing the atmosphere, imagining how their lives might unfold here. In their minds, they could already hear the echoes of footsteps down a hallway that was theirs. The clink of dishes in their own kitchen, the sound of a key turning smoothly in a door that belonged to them alone. It wasn't just a building they sought. It was belonging. It was permanence. It was proof that after years of working, saving, and sacrificing, they were finally ready to claim a space in the world that they could call home. And so, with their binders tucked close and their spirits lifted high, Marcus and Alana walked deeper into the lobby, ready to meet the Realtor, ready to take the next step toward the life they had envisioned together. The cool air inside the lobby wrapped around Marcus and Alana like a relief from the afternoon heat. The hum of conversation filled the room, voices rising and falling in casual excitement. A group of young couples gathered near a table of glossy brochures. Flipping through them eagerly, a Realtor in a tailored suit moved among them, his polished shoes clicking against the floor with practiced confidence. This was Mr. Grant, the man who held the keys, both literally and figuratively, to the possibilities inside this complex. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back neatly, and his bright tie caught the light each time he gestured. He carried himself with the ease of someone who had spent years selling dreams. Wrapped in bricks and glass as Marcus and Alana entered, Mr. Grant's eyes flicked toward them for the briefest of moments. There was no warmth in that glance, only calculation, swift, clinical, and dismissive. Before Marcus could lift his hand in greeting, the Realtor turned abruptly toward a white couple stepping in behind them. "Welcome, welcome." Mr. Grant's voice boomed with rehearsed enthusiasm. "You've come at the perfect time. We have some lovely units still available, and I'd be delighted to show you around." Marcus and Alana exchanged a glance, their hopeful smiles faltering, but not yet breaking. They moved closer to the desk, waiting patiently for a pause in his conversation. Marcus cleared his throat softly, offering a polite, "Excuse me," but Mr. Grant was already laughing warmly at a joke the other couple had made. Clapping the man on the shoulder as if they were old friends, he reached across the counter, sliding a folder thick with details into their hands. Alana's fingers tightened on the edge of her binder. She inhaled, steadying herself, and tried again. "Hi, we're here to learn more about the available units." Finally, Mr. Grant turned toward them. His smile remained in place, but it was thinner now, a forced stretch of lips that carried none of the warmth he had displayed seconds earlier. His eyes darted briefly to the folders in their hands, before returning to their faces. "Oh," he said, his tone clipped, his words coated with false regret. "I'm afraid all the units are spoken for." The sentence hung heavy in the air, blunt and final. Marcus blinked, startled. "All of them?" he asked. He leaned slightly forward, his voice even, but edged with disbelief. "Your website still lists several as available. We checked just this morning." Mr. Grant's smile tightened further. "Yes. Well, these things move quickly. The listings aren't always updated in real time." His tone suggested the matter was closed. He glanced past them, his eyes already searching for the next prospect. Alana felt a prickling heat rise along her neck. She shifted the binder against her chest and forced her voice to remain calm. "We're pre-approved," she said, lifting the edge of her documents as though to prove it. "We have everything ready today." "Yes. Well," Mr. Grant's gaze slid over the papers, but did not linger. "Like I said, all taken." The dismissal was sharp, unyielding. It wasn't just his words, it was the way he delivered them. The flatness of his tone, the impatience in his posture, the way he leaned slightly away from them as though eager to move on. And yet, even as he spoke, another couple entered the lobby. Mr. Grant's demeanor transformed instantly. "Good afternoon," he called out, his voice rich with cheer. He strode toward them, hand extended, smile wide. "You've arrived just in time. We still have some wonderful options left to show you." Marcus froze. The contradiction was unmistakable. Moments ago, the Realtor had declared every unit gone, every possibility closed. But now, before their very eyes, he had conjured up wonderful options for someone else. The pit of Marcus's stomach tightened. He glanced at Alana, whose lips parted slightly, her eyes filled with the dawning sting of recognition. This wasn't about availability. This wasn't about timing. This was about them. A silence stretched between the couple as Mr. Grant ushered the newcomers toward a display model, gesturing animatedly, his voice filled with promise. The warmth he poured into his words for them only deepened the coldness he had shown to Marcus and Alana. Alana lowered her gaze to the floor, blinking rapidly to fight the burn in her eyes. She had prepared so carefully for this moment, poured herself into details, into hope, and now it was unraveling, not because of their readiness, but because of something they could not change. Marcus's hand found hers. His grip was steady, though she could feel the tension coursing through him. His jaw tightened, his shoulders squared, but his voice remained soft when he leaned close. "We don't deserve this," Alana whispered, the words trembling on her lips. "No," Marcus replied quietly, his eyes locked on the Realtor across the room. "We don't." For a moment, anger surged within him, hot and insistent. He wanted to call out the lie, to demand answers, to force Mr. Grant to acknowledge the truth of what he was doing. But as he looked at his wife, her pride held together with fragile threads, her dignity wounded but not broken, Marcus chose silence. They had come in with hope, armed with every document, every ounce of preparation. Yet now they stood invisible, unwelcome in a place that had seemed to promise new beginnings. Marcus guided Alana gently toward the door. Each step felt heavy, as though the gleaming floors beneath them were pushing back against their presence. They passed the glossy photographs of smiling residents, the polished flowers, the glowing light, all of it now tainted with the bitter taste of exclusion. Outside, the sun was still shining, indifferent to what had unfolded. The complex stood as beautifully as it had minutes before, its glass walls glimmering with possibility. But for Marcus and Alana, the promise had fractured. They walked back down the path, their binders still clutched tightly in hand, but their hearts carrying a weight far heavier than paper. And though they said nothing more in that moment, both knew this wound would not be easily forgotten. The heavy glass doors closed behind them with a muted thud, shutting out the hum of voices and the Realtor's honeyed laughter that wasn't meant for them. Outside, the sun was still pouring its golden light across the pavement, yet it felt harsher now, exposing every bruise the moment had left on their dignity. Marcus walked in silence at first, his hands still wrapped around Alana's. His grip was firm, steady, but his jaw was locked tight. The muscle beneath his skin twitched every few seconds, betraying the storm building inside. His eyes were fixed on the ground, not because he was ashamed, but because if he lifted them, he feared the anger simmering there might overflow. Alana's steps were lighter, almost hesitant. She held her binder pressed against her chest like a shield, her chin tilted downward. Her face betrayed little, but her eyes shimmered in the sunlight with unshed tears. She tried to blink them away quickly before Marcus could notice, but he knew. He always knew. They reached the edge of the complex, where the manicured hedges gave way to the sidewalk. The sound of traffic returned, cars rushing by, the occasional honk, the distant laughter of children playing somewhere down the street. All of it felt cruelly normal, as though the world hadn't just tilted under their feet. Finally, Alana broke the silence. Her voice was low, fragile, but it carried the weight of something she had been holding back since the moment Mr. Grant dismissed them. "We don't deserve this treatment." The words slipped out almost like a confession. Quiet but wrought-out, Marcus stopped walking. He turned to her, his chest tight, his throat thick. She had lowered her eyes, her lashes damp, her lips trembling as she clutched her binder tighter. In that instant, Marcus felt a sharp ache that went beyond anger. It was the ache of seeing someone you love being wounded in a way you cannot protect them from. He clenched his jaw harder, the tendon standing out against his skin. His hand tightened around hers, not to restrain, but to anchor them both. His voice was rough when he finally spoke. "No, we don't." The words were simple, but inside them pulsed something fierce. They began to walk again, slower now. Alana drew a shaky breath, willing herself to calm. She lifted her gaze to the rows of glass windows, each one catching the sun like polished mirrors. A few figures moved inside, chatting with the Realtor who had turned them away. She could almost hear his warm voice, could almost see him handing over keys, promises, smiles. She imagined how easily he had chosen who belonged and who did not. Her stomach twisted. She had spent so long preparing for this day, checking numbers, filing documents, even rehearsing the questions she might ask. Yet none of that mattered. None of it had ever mattered to him. "I did everything right," she whispered, though it was more to herself than to Marcus. "We did everything right." Marcus heard her, and his silence deepened. In his mind, memories unspooled. The long hours he had worked, the promotions he had earned through sheer determination, the careful savings they had both built over the years. Every sacrifice, every choice, every late night had been aimed at this very moment, proving they were ready, that they had earned the right to build a home of their own. And yet, here they were, turned away as though none of it counted. A wave of humiliation rolled through him, sharp and hot. He remembered standing in that office, binder in hand, while Mr. Grant barely looked at him. He remembered the sting of being ignored, of being invisible, until it was time to push them aside. That memory cut deeper than he wanted to admit, but beneath the humiliation, something else was stirring. Determination. It burned in his chest like a coal refusing to go out. He could feel it in the way his hands refused to loosen, in the way his back refused to bend. He glanced at Alana, her tears finally slipping free despite her effort to hide them. In that moment, Marcus made a silent promise. This would not be the end of their story. Alana, too, felt a shift within herself. Though her heart ached and her spirit felt bruised, a small ember of defiance sparked inside her. She had been raised to believe that worth was not dictated by anyone else's perception. And though Mr. Grant had tried to strip them of their dignity with a dismissive smile, he had not succeeded. She still had her binder, her documents, her dreams, and she still had Marcus's hand steady in hers. As they reached their car, Marcus opened the door for her. Alana slid inside, setting her binder gently on her lap. She brushed a hand across her cheek, wiping the tears away, then straightened her shoulders. She did not want her last memory of this place to be her in tears. Marcus sat behind the wheel, gripping it firmly for a long moment before starting the engine. The air inside the car was thick with silence, but it wasn't an empty silence anymore. It was full of unspoken resolve. As the vehicle pulled away from the complex, Marcus looked once more in the rearview mirror. The building still gleamed in the sunlight, proud and unyielding, but in his eyes, they were no longer a symbol of something denied. They were a challenge, and Marcus never walked away from a challenge. Alana followed his gaze, her own expression hardening into quiet resolve. The sting of humiliation was still fresh, but layered beneath it now was a certainty she hadn't felt before. They would not be defined by this rejection. They drove on, leaving the complex behind them, but carrying something far more powerful than they had arrived with. Not documents, not pre-approval letters, not binders of proof. They carried a determination that no realtor's prejudice could extinguish. The seasons shifted quietly, as they always did. The last glow of summer gave way to autumn winds, and then to the chill of winter mornings. Life in the city pressed on, but the glossy housing complex that Marcus and Alana had once walked through, so hopefully no longer shone with the same promise. At first, the signs were subtle. A banner that once fluttered proudly at the entrance, luxury homes available, move-in ready, now hung faded and weather-beaten, its corners fraying against the wind. The balloons that had been tied in cheerful clusters were long gone. Inside, fewer and fewer cars filled the parking lot. By late winter, whispers began to spread. Units remained empty, despite the realtor's polished words. Potential buyers had come, toured, even taken brochures, but many walked away unimpressed or unconvinced by the high prices. Some whispered that management had overestimated the market. Others hinted that the sales staff had grown careless, too arrogant to notice their mistakes. Whatever the cause, the once prized complex had begun to stumble. By spring, the stumble became a collapse. Entire wings of the building remained dark at night, windows unlit like hollow eyes staring out at the street. The pool, once advertised as resort style, sat unused, its water gathering leaves. Grass grew patchy in corners where no one bothered to tend it. The complex had been built to symbolize prestige and permanence, yet only months later, it already carried the quiet despair of neglect. And then came the rumors. At first, they trickled through in casual conversation, a neighbor speaking over a fence, a headline in the local business section, a hushed remark in a coffee shop. Did you hear? Someone's trying to buy the entire complex. The idea was almost absurd. Not a unit, not a floor, but the entire property, every unsold apartment, every hallway, every brick. The realtor, Mr. Grant, was seen less often, his bright ties and booming laugh fading from the lobby. When he did appear, his usual confidence seemed strained, his eyes shadowed with worry. Speculation buzzed like static in the air. Maybe it's a development company, one broker suggested. They'll tear it down and build offices. No, another countered. It's got to be a foreign investor, someone with serious money, or a hotel chain. They could turn the whole place into suites. The truth was harder to grasp because the negotiations were shrouded in secrecy. The name on the contracts was hidden behind a company no one recognized, an anonymous holding group. Quiet but deliberate in its moves, meetings were arranged behind closed doors. Lawyers arrived in dark suits, carrying thick portfolios, but spoke to no one as they entered and left. The mystery deepened with each passing week. Whoever this buyer was, they were not only wealthy, they were strategic. They had waited until the market faltered, until desperation softened the edges of pride. Now, when the complex was no longer a shining beacon, but a failing dream, the offer came, and it was an offer too large to ignore. The staff whispered nervously in the hallways. Realtors speculated over coffee, their voices tinged with envy and fear. Residents, those few who had already moved in, watched uneasily as the value of their homes seemed to dangle on the edge of uncertainty. Grant, once the face of confidence, now walked with quicker steps, his phone pressed constantly to his ear. He argued in low tones, tried to smooth over concerns, tried to hold on to the image of control. But even he couldn't hide the truth. The complex was slipping from his grasp. In the city's financial circles, the story became a kind of riddle. Who had the audacity to make such a move? Who had enough wealth to buy entire blocks at once? More importantly, why this place? A complex that had once been marketed with arrogance, but now sat half empty like a hollow shell. As weeks stretched into months, the speculation turned into obsession. The anonymous buyer was spoken of like a phantom, powerful, invisible, untouchable. Newspapers ran speculative pieces with headlines like, "Mystery Investor Circles Trouble," "Housing Project," and "Who Holds the Keys to the Complex's Future?" At night, the lobby lights still flickered on, but fewer people came and went. The cheerful advertisements had been replaced with simple, desperate signs: "Special financing available, inquire within." The glossy photos of smiling couples had begun to curl at the edges on the bulletin board, and still, the negotiations dragged on. Behind closed doors, papers were signed, redrafted, signed again. The Realtor was no longer the decision maker. He was merely the messenger, and the more he realized it, the more his smile slipped, until even he seemed like a shadow of the man who once greeted customers with booming laughter. Through it all, the city held its breath, because everyone knew that when the mystery was finally revealed, it would not only decide the fate of the complex, it would reveal the hand of someone with power, enough to reshape it entirely. And though no one could yet imagine who stood behind the curtain, one thing was certain: when the truth came out, it would not just surprise them, it would shake them. The morning of the transaction arrived wrapped in a quiet, tense anticipation. The conference room at the downtown law office had been polished to perfection. Long mahogany table gleaming, walls lined with framed certificates, the faint aroma of fresh coffee lingering in the air. A stack of contracts sat neatly at one end of the table, their weight symbolic, heavy with the power to shift ownership of millions of dollars worth of property. Mr. Grant walked in with a brisk stride, his tie knotted tightly, his face set in an expression of forced confidence. He had barely slept for weeks. The mystery investor had been a faceless name behind a holding company, and today he would finally meet them. He had convinced himself it would be someone he recognized, a developer from across town, perhaps, or a foreign buyer he might later boast about securing. Whoever it was, he was determined to salvage his reputation, to spin this as a victory despite the collapse of sales. He rehearsed his charm in his head, his practiced smile ready to deploy, but the moment he stepped into the room, that smile faltered. At the far end of the table, standing tall and composed, were the figures he recognized instantly: Marcus and Alana. They were dressed in tailored suits that carried quiet elegance. Marcus in charcoal gray, Alana in deep navy that set off her poise like a crown. Their folders were no longer modest. Binders clutched nervously to their chests. Now, thick leather portfolios rested confidently before them, surrounded by a team of attorneys and financial advisors. The air around them felt different: calm, assured, powerful. For a moment, Mr. Grant's world tilted. He blinked once, then again, as though his eyes were deceiving him. But no, it was them. The couple he had brushed aside, the people he had declared unworthy with a dismissive smile. And now, here they were, not as hopeful buyers begging for a unit, but as the ones with the power to purchase the entire complex. Grant's throat went dry. His practiced smile faltered into a twitch before slipping altogether, leaving only disbelief etched across his features. His steps slowed, the confident stride shrinking into a hesitant shuffle. As his mind scrambled to catch up, Marcus caught his gaze, and for the briefest of moments, recognition flashed in his eyes. Recognition, and something deeper, Not anger, not arrogance, but calm certainty. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement that carried more weight than any words could. Alana's eyes met Mr. Grant's next. Her expression was steady, unreadable, but her posture radiated grace. She did not need to say anything. Her presence alone spoke volumes. "Mr. Grant," the lead attorney said crisply, breaking the silence. "Shall we begin?" The Realtor swallowed hard and forced himself into a seat, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the pen set before him. The contracts loomed on the table, the bold lettering declaring the transfer of ownership. His eyes darted once more to Marcus and Alana, still unable to fully grasp what was happening. As the meeting progressed, their attorneys handled the details with quiet efficiency. Numbers were discussed, clauses confirmed, signatures applied. Marcus and Alana spoke only when necessary, their voices calm and measured, but every word carried the weight of authority. The kind of authority Mr. Grant had never allowed himself to imagine they could wield. With each passing moment, the reality pressed harder against him. This was not a negotiation he could control. It was already decided. The power he once held had been stripped away, not by market shifts alone, but by the very people he had dismissed at last. The final document slid across the table toward Marcus. He lifted the pen with steady hands, signing his name with deliberate strokes. Then he passed it to Alana, who added her signature with quiet grace. The sound of the pen scratching against paper seemed to echo louder than anything else in the room. When the final copy was signed, the attorney gathered the stack, tapped it neatly into alignment, and announced, "Congratulations. Ownership is officially transferred." The words landed like a gavel strike. Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His eyes found Mr. Grant again. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He simply said, his tone calm but unwavering, "You didn't think we belonged there. Now we own it." The silence that followed was heavier than any outburst could have been. Grant's face drained of color. His lips parted as though to respond, but no words came. He could only sit there, staring at the couple who had risen above his prejudice, who had turned humiliation into triumph. Alana closed her portfolio and stood, smoothing the front of her suit. She glanced once at Mr. Grant, her eyes steady, then turned toward the door. Marcus followed, their team gathering behind them, the rustle of papers and quiet steps filling the space. As they left the conference room, the air seemed to shift. For Mr. Grant, it was suffocating, heavy with the weight of consequences. But for Marcus and Alana, it was liberating. Each step carried them further from the sting of rejection, further from the memory of standing unseen in that lobby months ago. Now, they walked not as hopeful buyers denied a chance, but as owners who had claimed far more than a home. They had claimed justice without raising their voices, without vengeance, simply by proving that their worth could never be measured by someone else's prejudice. And as the doors closed behind them, the gleaming complex no longer stood as a symbol of exclusion. It was theirs, entirely, undeniably theirs. The conference room had grown impossibly still, as though the air itself had paused to bear witness. The only sound was the soft, deliberate scrape of Marcus's pen across the parchment-thick paper. His strokes were steady, controlled, each letter a statement, each curve of ink a declaration that reached beyond mere ownership. It wasn't just a signature, it was history correcting itself. When he set the pen down, a hush deeper than silence followed. The attorneys glanced at one another, acknowledging the completion of a monumental transfer. Yet it wasn't their faces that drew the room's attention. It was Marcus's presence filling the space, calm but unshakable, as though he had carried the weight of every slight, every dismissal, and now laid it down with one final signature. He didn't rush. He didn't gloat. Slowly, Marcus lifted his gaze and locked eyes with Mr. Grant. The Realtor sat across from him, stiff in his chair, his tie suddenly feeling tight against his throat. The practiced charm that had once been his shield was gone, stripped away by disbelief. He looked smaller somehow, as if the foundation of superiority he had built his career on had cracked beneath his feet. Marcus's voice, when it came, was low but resonant, every syllable carrying the weight of restrained fire. "You didn't think we belonged here," he said, his words measured, deliberate. He paused just long enough for the truth to sting, for the memory of that humiliating afternoon to resurface in the Realtor's mind. Then, without raising his tone, he delivered the final strike. "Now we own it." The words landed with a force that echoed louder than a shout. They reverberated through the polished wood of the table, through the gleaming walls, through the air itself. For an instant, time seemed suspended to every person in the room, caught between the memory of injustice and the undeniable reality unfolding before them. Grant blinked rapidly, his mouth parting, but no defense rose to his lips. What excuse could possibly undo what he had done? What apology could erase the moment he had chosen to treat Marcus and Alana as invisible, unworthy, less than? None. His silence became his own confession. Around the table, the attorneys shifted subtly in their seats, the gravity of the moment not lost on them. Even they, hardened by years of negotiations and contracts, felt the sharp edge of irony, poetic justice in its purest form, unfolding not in anger, but in dignity. Alana, seated gracefully beside her husband, let the silence stretch a beat longer. Her hands rested atop her leather portfolio, fingers relaxed, her posture regal. She didn't need to speak. Her presence alone spoke volumes. She remembered the sting of humiliation, the tears she had fought to hold back that day. And now she sat here, not broken, not diminished, but elevated. The realtor's eyes darted between them, searching for some foothold, some scrap of control he might still cling to, but none remained. All he found staring back at him was the undeniable truth. The couple he had once dismissed now commanded the very building he had guarded so arrogantly. Marcus leaned back slightly, his shoulders broad, his expression calm. There was no triumph in his smile, only resolve. He had no need to boast, no desire to rub salt into wounds. His dignity was the sharpest victory of all. Across from him, Mr. Grant shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. The silence pressed heavier with each passing second, until even the faint tick of the wall clock sounded deafening. In that stillness, the truth crystallized. Prejudice had tried to deny Marcus and Alana a place in that complex, but destiny had carved out not just a place, but complete ownership. What had once been closed to them was now entirely theirs. Finally, Alana rose from her chair with graceful composure. Her movements were fluid, unhurried, as though every step was part of a quiet performance no one could forget. She gathered her belongings and glanced once more at Mr. Grant. Her eyes were calm, unwavering, not vengeful, but resolute. Marcus stood beside her, his towering frame casting a shadow across the table. Together, they were a vision of unshaken pride, of justice delivered not through rage, but through persistence, intelligence, and quiet strength. As they walked toward the door, the room remained silent. No congratulations were offered, no hollow words attempted. Even the attorneys, accustomed to victories and losses alike, knew better than to dilute the gravity of what had just unfolded. At the threshold, Marcus paused for only a fraction of a second. He didn't turn back fully, just enough so his final words could carry across the room. "This isn't just business," he said softly, his tone steady. "It's proof." Then he stepped through the doorway, Alana at his side, leaving behind a silence so thick it seemed carved into the walls. For Mr. Grant, that silence was suffocating. It wrapped around him, a reminder of his choices, his prejudice, and the cost of both. For Marcus and Alana, the silence was freeing. It was the sound of reclamation, of a story rewritten, of justice achieved. Outside, the city hummed as usual. Cars passed, conversations floated through the streets, life carried on. But for Marcus and Alana, the world felt different now. The weight of rejection that had once bent their shoulders had been lifted. In its place burned a quiet triumph, one that didn't need applause to be real. The complex they had once been denied stood waiting, not as a gatekeeper, not as a fortress, but as theirs, entirely theirs. And the silence they left in that room would echo long after they were gone. The weeks that followed were filled with the sounds of renewal hammers striking nails, paint rollers sweeping across walls, the hum of workers moving with purpose. What had once been a cold, half-empty complex now pulsed with energy, a place, being remade not just in structure, but in spirit. Marcus and Alana walked the grounds often, side by side, not as outsiders searching for acceptance, but as stewards of something greater than themselves. Every corner of the property reminded them of that first afternoon, the sting of being turned away, the quiet ache of rejection. Yet instead of allowing bitterness to take root, they chose something harder and far more powerful. They chose transformation. Under their leadership, the renovation became more than cosmetic. Marcus made sure each contractor was paid fairly and treated with dignity, regardless of background. Alana with her meticulous eye for detail, worked with designers to create spaces that felt warm, welcoming, alive with possibility. The sterile glass walls that once mirrored exclusion now reflected sunlight over fresh greenery, playgrounds, and benches where families of every color could sit and breathe in a sense of belonging. The neighbors noticed, so did the community. Word spread that the new owners were different. Here, every prospective buyer was greeted with the same kindness, offered the same respect. Here, financial readiness mattered, not the color of one's skin, not the assumptions drawn from appearances. One afternoon, as the first phase of renovated units opened for viewing, Marcus stood quietly near the entrance. A young couple approached, Latino, nervous, holding a folder of documents much like he and Alana once had. Marcus saw the way they looked at the building, with both hope and hesitation, as though bracing for rejection before even stepping inside. He smiled warmly, stepping forward, with his hand outstretched. "Welcome," he said, his voice steady and kind. "We're glad you're here. Take your time. This place is meant to be a home for families like yours." The couple's eyes softened. Relief replaced tension in their faces. For them, it was a simple moment. For Marcus, it was a revolution. Alana watched from nearby, her heart swelling. This was why they had endured the humiliation, why they had pushed through the anger. Not just to own buildings, but to create change. To carve out a space where no one would ever again feel the small, sharp sting of being dismissed for reasons that had nothing to do with their worth. Inside the sales office, a framed mission statement hung on the wall a touch Alana insisted on. The words were simple: every family deserves dignity. Every buyer deserves respect. It became the guiding star of their work. The principal whispered in every decision. Months later, the complex was no longer struggling. The once vacant units filled quickly, occupied by families of every race, culture, and story. Children's laughter echoed through the courtyards. Evening lights glowed in every window. What had once been a monument to exclusion was now a living testament to community. But perhaps the most telling moment came when Marcus and Alana attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the final building. Reporters gathered, cameras flashing, community leaders standing in support. As Marcus spoke to the crowd, his voice carried not just across the complex, but into the hearts of everyone listening. "We were told, not so long ago, that we didn't belong here," he said, his tone calm but resolute. "But we learned something important that day. Prejudice may deny someone for a moment, but it cannot stop destiny. This place belongs to all of us, not just in name, but in spirit. And we vow that no one who comes here will ever be turned away because of the color of their skin." Applause swelled. But Marcus's words were not crafted for applause. They were crafted for memory, for every child watching to remember that dignity was possible, that justice could be quiet but unshakable. Alana took the microphone next, her eyes shining under the sunlight. "Respect costs nothing," she said, softly, letting the crowd lean in to catch each word. "Yet its absence can cost everything: dreams, futures, even faith in humanity. We cannot control the past, but together we can shape the future." And this, she gestured to the vibrant homes, to the families standing shoulder to shoulder, "is what the future should look like." The crowd rose to its feet, clapping, cheering, some even weeping. But beyond the noise, beyond the speeches and the ceremony, there was something else, something deeper, a sense of healing, as though a wound long ignored had finally been acknowledged, bandaged, and set on the path to recovery. That night, as the sun set behind the glowing buildings, Marcus and Alana stood hand in hand at the edge of the courtyard. Children darted past, parents chatted on benches, laughter rang against the walls that had once been silent. "This," Alana whispered, resting her head against Marcus's shoulder, "is the home we were looking for all along." Marcus squeezed her hand gently, his eyes never leaving the families that filled the space. "And we built it together," he replied. For them, it was never about revenge. It was about rewriting the story, not just theirs, but the story of anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. And as the lights flickered on one by one across the complex, the narrator's reflection settled like a gentle truth over the scene. Prejudice may deny someone for a moment, but it cannot stop destiny. Respect costs nothing, yet its absence can cost everything. The night deepened, the buildings glowed, and within their walls, hope lived on.